415ers podcast brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. That's Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. Please download the Odyssey app, rate us, subscribe to us there. Also check us out on the 95.7 The Game YouTube channel. Subscribe while you're there as well. We're coming at you twice a week here as we move towards September 10th, week 1 of the NFL season, which will ramp things back up to 3 episodes per week. Okay, Mark, there was another comment that came out of 49ers, not camp, but Kyle Juszczyk was on with Guy Haberman and John Middlecoff. They run a very entertaining podcast, and Kyle Juszczyk is evidently a fan of it and has been listening, he said, for the last few years, and went on with them this week and was talking about things that, the guys get right and the things that they're kind of off on. And I think one of the hosts was called out by Juszczyk and essentially, in a joking and fun-loving manner, but basically saying, like, the way that you guys perceive our kind of relationship with Trey Lance is absolutely off base. Like, the fact that we went to a basketball game, Juszczyk, Kittle, Purdy, and McCaffrey all went to a Warriors game, and the fact that Trey Lance wasn't there doesn't mean we hate Trey Lance. In fact, Trey Lance is beloved as a person in the 49ers locker room. That was the message from the highest paid fullback in football, Kyle Juszczyk. But the question we have, Mark, is, of course, well, he's beloved as a person, but is he loved as a player?
Oh, yeah, that's the obvious one. Kyle Juszczyk is obviously very complimentary about the person that Trey Lance is. I think there was also a case where Kittle and McCaffrey were at a Warriors game with Sam Darnold as well. So I think both quarterbacks were seen out with groups.
They've also been out with Jimmy Garoppolo a couple times.
They have been. So really every who's who 49ers quarterback except for Trey Lance. But Juszczyk, doesn't mean we don't like the guy. I mean, he said, quote, "Everybody loves Trey. The dude really does work his ass off. He's super personable. He is a very well-liked guy. So for whatever reason that he wasn't at the basketball game, it's not because we don't like him." Okay, great. If you somehow dislike Trey Lance, you need to get checked, because Trey Lance seems to be the most likable, the most straightforward, straight shooter. And, who knows? Maybe it's just what he's putting out there. I don't know the guy personally, but it just seems that way. So Kyle Juszczyk, you saying he's beloved makes a lot of sense to me. However, just because he's a good person does not mean he's a good player. You can like the guy, and you could think he's a terrible football player, and every time he checks into the game, you could be thinking, oh, God, here we go again. Like, strap in. This is going to be rough. So I really don't put much stock into this comment because simply you could be a great person, you could be well-liked, but you could be one of the worst football players in the league. Not saying that I think Trey Lance is, but those two really don't have much of a correlation to me.
Yeah, I'm generally with you, but I just think that Kyle Juszczyk and the rest of the 49ers locker room, when it's talking about how loved Trey Lance is as a player, it's a question mark. Like many things about Trey Lance, we just don't simply know. I mean, I think that if they didn't believe in his quarterbacking skills, there would be more breadcrumbs to follow. I mean, Mike Silver's report about the locker room, being happy about Jimmy Garoppolo being back in the fold after Trey Lance went down, or at least feeling like, like we're back in a sense. I think that's probably the biggest example of it, although those names were anonymous. But a lot changes over the course of a season. And so I think Trey Lance is beloved as a player and a person. The fact is he just hasn't been able to get on the field or stay on the field to the point where people can point to, concrete examples and say, that's why we love this guy. I didn't hear Kyle Juszczyk really pump up Brock Purdy all that much. Mark, do you know who the first touchdown pass of Brock Purdy's professional career went to?
Are you saying this because it was Kyle Juszczyk?
It was Kyle Juszczyk. I think his only receiving touchdown, by the way. But it's not like he's saying, oh, well, he's able to get me the ball and, Brock Purdy's my guy because, of that play. Like, I don't know how much that happens either. So I don't read a whole lot into it. But I think it is interesting that, there's a guy. This has been one of the few guys, along with Kittle in OTAs, that have kind of taken up the cape for Trey Lance entering this season.
I think it would be a little different if, say, for example, last season played out the way it did for Trey Lance. He started, it was a struggle. He got hurt, and he was out for the rest of the year. Jimmy Garoppolo fills in, whatever. Either he doesn't get hurt, he plays the whole season, or he does get hurt, like it does happen. But let's say Brock Purdy struggled. He didn't have this transcendent start to his career, and he's not looked at now as the starter. Let's say that it was once again presumed to be Trey Lance's job because Jimmy Garoppolo, for whatever reason, still moved on. The Niners didn't want to bring him back. You either still didn't know what you had in Purdy and you still have no expectation because he didn't ever really get a chance or do it, or you got your answer and the answer was bad. However it played out, Trey Lance's job, but you still have all these questions about Trey Lance. Then I think this comment would matter a little bit more to me. I think Kyle Juszczyk can come out and say, we love this guy. He's fantastic. He's a great person. He's a hard worker. Everyone in this locker room loves him. He can say that without much fear because if things go well, Trey Lance is not going to play much football. If he was the team's starter and you still weren't that confident about him, Kyle Juszczyk coming out and saying this about Trey Lance when you know damn well he's going to be put to the test week 1 against a good defense on the road in Pittsburgh, that matters a little bit more to me. So the fact that this was said about a quarterback who, in all likelihood, Evan, I don't like this, but in all likelihood, probably isn't going to see much of the field this year unless there's a major injury or two. The fact that it's said about a second string, third string quarterback doesn't mean too much to me.
No, I mean, it's just, I think, trying to pick out an example from their conversation of like, hey, you guys, he's being complimentary in the process, of course, talking about what things that these two gentlemen, but in general, the media get right. But of course, there are a few things where they are just completely off base, completely miss. I'm sure we're in the exact same boat and probably to a lesser degree of being correct. But you know, that's just the way that Kyle Juszczyk and his Harvard Ivy League mind tends to work when he's talking about Trey Lance. So I like to hear that, you know, there's no seemingly any sign of bad blood between the people. And I think it also aligns with the 49ers culture that we kind of overlook in a lot of cases, because as much as, you know, Kyle Shanahan gets a lot of the flack and a lot of the credit, the players seem to enjoy playing for him. They seem to enjoy playing in Santa Clara, and someone like Christian McCaffrey can just seamlessly fit into the fold. And so can a guy like Trey Lance, who everyone on the outside right now is not so much in favor of. So I expect that also to continue at training camp.
Well, yeah, and I think the other thing here about what Juszczyk said is obviously about him as a person. Does Juszczyk know if he likes him as a player? I mean, it's similar to what we talked about with what Kyle Shanahan said. I
Yeah,
was a little
probably not.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised that Shanahan said, you know, quote, we have 3 guys who can play. Well, I guess I wasn't really surprised that he said that. I would be surprised if he actually believes that, because how can you be confident that Trey Lance can play? You just simply haven't seen it yet. If you're confident one way, it's probably more confident that he can play as opposed to being confident that he can play. So what is Juszczyk going to say about him as a player? I mean, if he's being honest, we just don't know yet. So I don't think this carries that much weight. But you are right about the locker room and the chemistry and the culture I think that the 49ers have cultivated. They talk about it a lot, and they're sometimes made fun of for it. Like when they take a potential draft pick out to dinner before the draft, they're always really careful about making sure that they're selecting players with the right character. It does seem like Trey Lance obviously fits that mold. Kyle Juszczyk fits that mold 100%. So many of the guys on that team fit that mold. So they deserve credit in that regard. Kyle Juszczyk definitely is one of the veterans of that group that helps hold the locker room together. He's not going to go out and disparage the character of a young player in Trey Lance. But in terms of anyone's ability on the field, I think there's absolutely nothing to read into it.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that Kyle Juszczyk, I think, is one of the faces of that 49ers culture, and he wasn't even drafted by the 49ers. I mean, he came from Baltimore. So just shows how inclusive they are as a group.